So today, what I thought we could talk about was heartache, trials, tribulations, death, and grieving. Aren't you so glad you came to church today for that uplifting, encouraging message? Today we are turning to this phrase in the 23rd Psalm, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now, you might think, man, I don't know if I really want to go into all that today, but here's the deal. It's a funny thing about valleys. The only way to get to the other side is to be willing to go all the way to the bottom before you could come back up on the other side. And my goal for you is that by the end of this message, you can own two words. Two words that I think are actually perhaps the most powerful two words a person could declare in a world like this. Two words that actually have the ability to open up hope and meaning and purpose in a world like this that is full of dark valleys. Two words that are buried in Psalm 23 that we often don't even notice. And those two words are, even though. Even though all of this, still that. Even though. There's an amazing thing about this psalm. The shape of the psalm actually matches the shape of the journey that a shepherd takes the sheep through. It starts in the high pastures. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. But then the wintertime comes, so he has to take the sheep down into the valley. And once they are in the winter, then they take them back up in the spring, up the other side. You know, we say the 23rd Psalm a lot at funerals, right? Which is a good thing. But this psalm isn't about the end of life. This song is about the middle of life. And if you look at this, how the psalm is actually laid out, where is this line? It's right in the middle of the psalm. Why? Because the dark shadows happen in the middle of life. Unfortunately, some of you know how this works. You're going along and everything's the same until the day it's not. Until your employer comes and asks you to clean out your desk. Until the doctor tells you, no, your baby will never be normal. Until the day that you discover your teenage son's stash of drugs in his closet. Until the day that your underage daughter comes and tells you she's pregnant. Until the day that the doctor looks you in the eye and says, yes, you do have cancer. Until the day that your spouse says, I'm too tired, I'm done with this. And when we have days like that, it literally feels like we are in a dark, dark valley. We are in the shadow of death. So this morning, at this stage, this season in your life, are you in a dark valley? If you are, my prayer is this time together will actually bless and encourage you, because we are going to get to those two words. But for most of you, I'm praying that that is not the case. And if that is not the case for you, then here's the word for you. This is the day to memorize this psalm. This is the time to make it part of your spiritual DNA. Well, why? Because it's too late to start on the storm cellar when the hurricane is already upon you. The time to try and set up your tent is not when the rain is already pouring down. The time to gather the firewood is not when the snow has already fallen. The time to prepare is now. Why? Because you know from your own experience, when you go through that dark valley, it's like the clouds roll in and you cannot see and you don't know what's ahead and you're not even sure where you are. And when that happens, what you need to do is remember to have an understanding of the big story of what you saw before the clouds moved in. In other words, this is what it means to walk by faith, not by sight. When we say walk by faith, not by sight, we don't mean, just have blind faith and don't pay attention to what you can see. No, what we mean is when you can't see at all, you need to remember what you knew before the clouds rolled in. So I think this is important, really important for each one of us. So the 23rd Psalm gives us a series of vistas. Each phrase is a different outlook that tells us something about who God is, who we are, and how to live in a world like this one that we're actually living in. So as we begin here this morning, let's begin, because I really want us to memorize this. I really want us to bury it in our heart. I really want it to be part of your spiritual DNA so that wherever you go, when you get hit by the storms, it is there with you. So let's begin by saying together one more time each phrase that we have learned so far, saying this out loud together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And now we come to the phrase for today. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Now look at the pivot that just happened in this psalm. Notice how it works. It starts addressing God in the third person. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores me. He guides me. But now you, oh God, you are with me. Do you see what happened? The psalm turned from a declaration to a prayer, remembering truths to living those truths. It's going from theology to faith. I heard this description of the difference between theology and faith. A lot of you guys know I love theology. I love philosophy. This person said, here's the difference. The relationship between theology and faith is, theology is like reading the menu, and faith is actually eating the meal. You need the menu to know what's possible. You need to know what's true, what's real, what are the options. But the goal is not to spend your whole life reading the menu. The goal is to actually eat the meal. And David has come to this point now where it's not theoretical anymore. This is about life as close and intimate as it gets. We have seen that the Lord is a good shepherd who leads us. Last week, he leads us in the paths of righteousness. We're like, oh, isn't that great? Where did he just lead him now? The Lord led him into the valley of the shadow of death. The Lord did. And when that happens, we don't like it. We have a good shepherd, but we are stubborn sheep. And so what happens is we tend to wander away because we wonder, why in the world is he taking me this way? David Roper says, the path by which God takes us often seems to lead away from our good, causing us to believe we must have missed a turn, we must have taken a wrong road, we must be outside God's will, or maybe even God isn't good. Why is he allowing this? But if we've been told and if we believe that we're actually supposed to be on a bumpy track, that we need to go through these dark valleys, then every jolt along the way simply confirms the fact that we're still on the right road. But it takes deep trust in the goodness of the shepherd to really see life that way. So my goal, as I said, for you and for me is to be able to own these two words that David could say, even though. Even though. So let's begin with this. What exactly does this phrase, the valley of the shadow of death, mean? I hate to tell you this, but it's true. Its exact meaning, very appropriately, is actually shrouded in mystery. The earliest Hebrew text we have says literally it is the valley of the deepest darkness. It is the place of danger, which is especially the place where God's absence is felt. It is the place of anxiety and unfocused dread. But and of course, what is the valley of the deepest darkness that people never return from? Death itself. And so the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Bible that the New Testament people knew, looked at that Hebrew and translated it, the shadow of the valley of death, because death is the deepest darkness there is. This ambiguity, is it the valley of the deepest darkness, or is it the valley of death, perfectly matches the very situation it's describing. Because what is it like for you when you're down in that valley? You don't know how it will end. You don't know how to interpret it. It's the valley of uncertainty and ambiguity and fear. What is going to happen? Will everything fall apart? Will you survive it, or will you come out the other end? Will your loved one survive this valley? What lies waiting up ahead for you? This is the valley of the shadow of unknowing, uncertainty, fear, even terror. And I know, unfortunately, that many of you have been in valleys like that. Many of us can look back at some season in our life and say, that was my darkest valley. The reason Psalm 23 is so important, so needed, is that it is honest about the way life really is, but then it also adds, even though. And that even though makes all the difference. But before we can claim the even though, we have to be willing to go to the very bottom of this valley. And what do we need to face there? I think we need to face three things: anxiety, death, and grief. Three different shadows: anxiety, death, and grief. So let's begin with the first shadow, the shadow of anxiety that comes when we walk through the dark valleys of life. Even though I walk through the darkest valley. When the clouds roll in and the shadows fall, when we experience the heartbreaks of life, at least for me, it gets so very hard to see. We lose all perspective. We say, it's no use, I can't go on. We begin to wonder if the valley will ever end. We begin to believe that life will always feel that way. When a tremendous tragedy happened in our family, a year later, I wrote in my diary, will this emptiness ever go away? Nothing tastes in this world of gray. And I just wondered, would I ever feel normal again? And many of you know when these kinds of things happen to you, you look at everyone else and their world just seems to be going on fine, and you're the odd one out. and we experience the isolation of despair. We feel alone in the world. But David, the guy who wrote this psalm, the guy who was called a man after God's own heart, like the ultimate example of a spiritual example of somebody who had deep, deep faith, he also knew what it feels like to be this way. It wasn't a sign of his lack of faith. Listen to Psalm 142. David cries there in verse 4, "No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life." So, if that's the world as it is, what advice does the Bible actually have? What does it actually teach us about life? Does it say, oh, you just need to have faith, you just need to see it through rose-colored glasses? Just the opposite. It teaches us that life is hard. I heard one guy say, expecting life to be fair to you because you're a good person is like expecting a bull not to charge you because you're a vegetarian. The bull doesn't care. The bull doesn't care. And that's the way life is. The Bible teaches us that life can be very, very brutal and hard, even if you're a really good person, even if you love Jesus with all your heart. But why does God allow the world to be so? Why does God allow the world to be a world where there are valleys of shadow? And the answer is, I don't know. Now, I could give you some partial answers, some partial reasons. Calvin, like we're Calvinists, Calvin makes some arguments. I don't think any of them add up enough. I mean, they're partial, but they don't get you all the way home. But here are two things I can say to you for sure. I'm absolutely convinced that I cannot understand the eternal reasons for why things happen as long as I am within the stream of time. When I am within the stream of time, it puts blinders onto me. I can't get the perspective. You know, if only I could get over here, then I could see it from this other perspective and get it. But as long as I am within the stream of time, I can't see that, and I'm not going to see it till the end of days. And so I have to just admit to myself, this is the human condition. And the second thing I think you can take to the bank, which is even more important, is this: that the most helpful, accurate, trustworthy way to understand God from within the stream of time is to see him as the shepherd who is leading you through the stream of time, the shepherd who's willing to lead you through the days of your life. He does not take us out of the valley, he takes us through it. God's role is not to protect us from pain and loss. God's role is to protect us from letting pain and loss define our lives. Let me say that again. God's role is not to protect us from pain and loss, but to protect us from letting pain and loss define our lives. And sometimes, not always, sometimes, good things can grow even in the valley of the shadow of death. Roper writes, "There are times that wean us away from sensuality, that tendency to live by feelings rather than by faith in God's unseen presence. We can become independent of places and moods and content with God alone." Here's a brutal thing he goes on to say, and I believe it's true. There are glimpses of God that can only be revealed when earthly joy has ceased. Again, like turning off the lights at night in your house so you can see the stars, the bigger picture above. So this verse, as I said, has three different shadows. It not only gets us to wrestle with the shadow of the heartbreaks of life, it also gets us to face the second shadow, the ultimate shadow, death itself. It reminds us of the briefness of life. Psalm 103 says, "As for man, as for woman, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. Then the wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more." Life is so fleeting. This image that you see was taken in the Czech Republic. It's a graveyard from the 1500s. And wind and time have literally erased the names from the tombstones. And its place remembers it no more. That's what's going to happen to me. That's what's going to happen to you. I am not talking about this to be morbid. I'm talking about this because we have to face reality. One of the great weaknesses of our particular culture is our denial of death. We always act surprised when it comes. Oh, really? But a healthy approach is to face reality as it is. The Bible tells us to number our days because they are few, because life is over before we know it. But here's the thing. The problem is not so much death itself as the knowledge that we are going to die. Harold Kushner points out, it's not the fact of death, but the knowledge that we will one day die that casts the shadow over our lives. Would we be better off if we did not know that death awaited us? We are the only creatures who know. And so that knowledge can cast a shadow over even our sunniest days. Quick show of hands here. How many of you have dogs? How much time does your dog spend sitting around contemplating his mortality? I am so happy. Our dog had no idea. He was just so happy for the day. Like, I am just so happy to be alive. You might think we might be better. Well, think about that. This summer we looked at Genesis. Maybe this is exactly what God meant when he warned Adam and Eve against eating the tree of knowledge, for on the day you eat it, you will die. Well, they didn't literally die that day, but that day they began to die, and that day they knew of death. So on that day, the shadow fell. But there is one good way to respond to that knowledge and three bad ways to respond to this knowledge. So we can respond to our knowledge of our own mortality in one of four ways. And as I describe these, I want you to be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. Which of these four ways is the way you really lean the most? Denial, indulgence, despair, or engagement. So the first one, denial, we know what that one is. Just pretend it's not going to happen. Refuse to think about it. Refuse to talk about it. This is actually a big deal. Like, I'll try and talk to people. I don't want to talk about that. That's depressing. Yeah, what's really more depressing is when it happens and you're not ready. But we deny. Okay, denial is the first option. The next one is indulgence. Eat, drink, for tomorrow we die. This ride is almost over. You better grab what you can get while you can. In other words, be nothing more than a consumer. Third one, despair. What's the use? Everything turns to dust anyway. Everything's ruined. And when you fall for that, you're living as if you were already dead. But there's a fourth way, the way of engagement. engaging with the gift that has been given, which is this brand new day. Since my days are limited, let me make the most of them. Since every choice I make rules out all the alternative things I could have done, and since I'm never going to have enough time to do everything I wish I could do, then I need to number my days. I need to be careful about how I spend my time and really choose what is good and best and beautiful and true, to make every single day count. You see, here's the deal, you guys. Sigmund Freud was wrong. Sigmund Freud was wrong when he said that people choose between pain and pleasure. Okay, psychologist. The psychologist in the room, talk to me in cafe if I'm wrong about this. He was wrong when he said you have to choose between pleasure and pain. The real choice is between inviting both pleasure and pain into our lives, or else opting for a life of numbness. How many of us are choosing a life of numbness? I don't want that. So how should we think about our brief lives? Hey, camera people, I'm going off script. Some of you have heard me say this before. We look at our life like an hourglass, and we imagine that all these days that we had and they're running out. I'm running out of time. It's getting emptier and emptier, and we fret and we worry, but we forget that idea is not true at all. You were never promised so many days that you're running out of. The Bible doesn't promise you you're going to have, it doesn't promise that at all. You think you are living in the top of the hourglass, but you're actually living in the bottom of the hourglass. What's happening there? I'm gaining a brand new day. I'm gaining another day and another. It's all gift. You're not running out of time, you're receiving time. The ancient Jews, when they would wake up in the morning, would say, Father God, King of the universe, thank you for giving me consciousness again. It's like I woke up, which means God gave me consciousness again. It's a new gift for a new day. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That is how we are to understand time. And that is so helpful for me, and I'd love to end there, but we got to go all the way down to the bottom of the valley. The third and final shadow for me is the death of loved ones. I have a bag of all the books that I've been reading on the 23rd Psalm. It's about 35 pounds. A lot of people, a lot of brilliant people. And you've heard me quoting some of them today. And what I found that is almost every one of these guys who rings true to me, they've all experienced heartbreak in their lives. These are people who say even though, but they had absolute tragedies in their life. So, for example, I've been quoting Kushner. His infant son died. I've been quoting Roper. Roper says, my wife went to higher ground. For 2 years, we walked through the valley of the shadow of death, watching her beautiful body being destroyed by cancer. It is only when we have walked with him through some very deep troubles that we discover he can lead us to find our refreshment in him right in the midst of our difficulty. Unless one has actually gone through such an experience, it may seem difficult to believe. Only those who have been through dark valleys really truly know how to console and comfort and encourage others in a similar situation. In other words, you can use your own loss in such a beautiful way to help other people who are in the middle of their loss right now. But in order for you to be able to be used that way, you need to continue your walk out of the valley. I've known people who were so hurt by life that they chose to remain in the shadow. They never made it through the valley to a place where the sun could shine on them again. When Kushner's infant son died, they joined a support group, a grief group, and it was so helpful for them, this group of grieving parents grieving together. But then he began to notice that there were some people who had still come 10 years later. Some remain in the shadows out of misplaced sense of love and loyalty. And some, and I hate to say this, but it is true sometimes, some remain in the valley of the shadow because they can continue to have a claim on our sympathy. Like, this is my story. And their whole story is not the present, it's the past. The valley of the shadow of death is a strangely seductive place because it's impossible to enjoy, but it's hard to leave. What Kushner says to people who are still stuck there, still hanging on to the shadow, is this: if the roles had been reversed, if you had been the first one to die, what advice would you have left for your loved one? Would you have told them, stay down there in the valley? If you really love me, you'll stay down there in the valley. Or would you say to them, no, I want you to get up and go up on the other side. I want you, there's still life ahead. There is still beautiful things in the world. Get up and go. And the truth is, you can never go back, right? We can never go back to the way things were. But we can go down and up the other side. And that's what David eventually did in this psalm. So is all that this psalm telling us that you ought to buck up, you ought to have a stiff upper lip, you need to move on with your life? No. Right at the darkest, deepest point, here comes the gift. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I will not fear evil. How could he say that? Because he knew where to look. Not at the shadows, not at the other sheep who were driving him nuts, but at the shepherd. Imagine, if you've ever been on a high ropes course, imagine there's a coach on the high ropes course at the other end, and you're trying to step out on the rope, and you're kind of terrified. What does he say to you? Don't look down. Keep your eyes on me and walk straight ahead. And that's exactly what you need to do. Jesus says this to you and me this morning. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't look down. Trust in God. Trust also in me. You can trust me. In God's house, there are many rooms. If it was not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'm going to come back and take you with me, that you also might be where I am. So think about what this is like to do things for the very first time. I remember what it was like for me the first time I scuba dove in open water, in cold, murky, open water, not knowing what was below me. I remember the first time I fired a 12-gauge shotgun. I remember the first time I shot a class 4 rapid in an open canoe. I remember the first time I cliff dove into a pool, not knowing if it was actually deep enough. Right? Because I'd never jumped there before. What was going to happen? In all those incidents, you guys, I'd like to think, yeah, it was like really cool. I was afraid. I was afraid. Why? Because I'd never done it before. I didn't know what it was going to be like. But each time, I had somebody with me, a guide, who'd done it 1,000 times. And for them, like, come on, no big deal. Just jump. Just do it, dude. Because they'd already done it 1,000 times. They knew exactly what it was like. So here's the deal. When it comes to death, I haven't died yet. I haven't done this dying thing yet. Like, it's not like I've done it 25 times. I'm a newbie. I haven't done it yet. And so I'm afraid. But to the person who's done it 1,000 times, it's no big deal. This is the way it is. We've never done it before. But Jesus has handled it 1,000 times before. And that's why he can say, be at peace, trust me, don't freak out, keep your eyes on me, and you will be fine. I have never died before, but Jesus has. And what he declares is that death is not a dead end. It is a tunnel. Death is but a dark valley that opens up in the wide spaces of eternity with God. And this is what the first Christians believed. They were ecstatic with joy when they got this. They weren't in denial. In fact, many of them suffered greatly, but they took Jesus at his word. And what did it do? It made them a bunch of rowdy misfits. Man, I want to throw my hat in with them. Full of joy in a world full of terror. Have you thrown your hat in with Jesus? Are you willing to take Jesus at his word? Because if you do, then you will know what Paul meant and why Paul could say in Romans 8:38, I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. I will not fear, for thou art with me. God is at work in the past. God is at work in the present. God is at work in the future. In other words, the reason he will fear no evil is not only because he knows how the story will end, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, but because also God is with him right now. I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me now. The good shepherd has already walked through his own valley of the shadow of death and now has come back to walk with me through this life, through death, out the other side. And because of his work on the cross, conquering sin and death and the devil, now his followers too can come back from their own wounds and help other travelers. Listen to what Keller says. Those of you who are hurting today, listen to what Keller says. It appears that the life of God can only flow in blessing through the valleys that have been carved and cut into our lives through excruciating experiences. So how can God use you as a wounded healer? Here's the way. Don't let other people go through the valley alone. You can do that. Don't let other people go through the valley alone. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have all the answers. You don't need to give them explanation. You need to give them consolation. You need to not let them be all alone. And here's what the truth is, you guys. It's the same way with God. God does not explain. He comforts. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, is perhaps the most succinct response to the question of why bad things happen to good people. I do not know, God does not explain, but he comforts, and I will not fear, for he is with me. So finally, you guys, whatever season you are in today, whether it is full of sadness or full of joy, whether you are in the shadowed valley or standing on the mountaintop, would you declare with me one last time the reason that we can have hope, saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Amen. Amen. Thanks for joining us today as we strive to think carefully about our faith. You can help keep this ministry on the air by making a donation at leverington.org. For now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.